host, Peter Komendowski, and welcome to Surviving Bad, where we explore Iowa stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. Today we're talking about the science of distracted driving. We love our cars, they're at the center of our lives for work and play, and the automobile is a powerful form of transportation, yet also one of the most dangerous things we handle. Distractions have been raising the risks of driving. So joining us to help us understand the human factors that contribute to the risks is Professor Daniel McGehee from the National Advanced Driving Simulator at the University of Iowa. Daniel, welcome to the show. Tell us a little about yourself and what goes on there at that National Advanced Driving Simulator.
Well, great. First off, thank you for having me on your program, and thank you, Peter, for all the work that you do for the public, and to MediaCom for all the great programming they put together for this. I've been at the University of Iowa for about 30 years. I have been studying the interaction between humans and machines for about 35 years. I got my start as a cockpit designer at Boeing in their commercial aircraft division as my first job out of college, which was really fun, and then transitioned into the automotive industry, where I really applied what I knew, what I trained to do in human factors engineering that really focuses in on the limitations of human perception and memory and how we can design machines to be much more efficient around their operation. And starting with pilots who are highly selected, highly trained, in really good health with great vision, it was quite different to then shift to the automotive domain, where in Iowa here, you start driving at 14, and we have something like 38 drivers over the age of 100. So everybody drives. And we have many different health issues with people who drive, people that have low vision, people who are elderly, who are have some memory issues. We have 14-year-olds who lack experience. We have 16-year-olds. When you pile in a bunch of other teenagers, become quite risky. So the behavioral side of driving is quite vast for those of us who study how to design the perfect car. And also, we also study when things go wrong. So the car crash, and they're not accidents, I might add, because crashes have causes. A lot of times the public sees an accident as much more of something that is an act of God. It just happens. But those of us who study crashes see the intricacies and the nuance of things when they go wrong.
It's a fascinating thing, and I've noticed, as last time I bought a new car, which was recently, the biggest interest I had were safety features. And in fact, I was surprised when it told me to keep my eyes on the road, which would seem to make sense. And it surprises me, but I'm also thankful. I mean, I know that I could disengage that. I can disable it, but I told myself, why? If my eyes aren't on the road, this is valuable insight. Is the driver getting worse? Because my first thought was that I must be getting bad if the car has to tell me to watch the road.
Well, Peter, it's a great observation. Cars, as you know, especially with a newer vehicle, and your viewers who have been riding or driving newer cars know that today there's a lot more going on inside and outside of the vehicle. 30 years ago, we didn't have the mobile phone. We didn't even have cell phones. We didn't have Twitter. We didn't have Instagram. We didn't have Snapchat. We didn't have TikTok. The smartphone is really one of the few things that is ubiquitous in our society today, meaning that literally every person has one. And getting earlier. So used to be that 16-year-olds got their first cell phone when they got to drive. Now we're looking at kids down at 11, 10, 9, 8 years old getting their first smartphone. So there's a lot of things that are competing for our attention in a car, whether we're riding or driving. And I think that's an important distinction, is that we have to also remember that we have to be good passengers to have an extra set of eyes on the road.
Yeah, I think the point might be that, not only are we a driver, but if we're alone in the car, we're also a passenger. So we probably need to care about ourselves. What are the statistics looking like for traffic safety between younger drivers and elderly drivers? Is there sort of a coming together where the similar problems affect them both, or is there a different set of problems?
Well, I think there's a different set of issues that you see in younger drivers versus older drivers. And what's interesting is that historically, there used to be, we called sort of a bathtub shave curve. So when the younger you are, the more you crash, and then we enter into our mid-20s, and then all the way until we hit our mid-70s and our 80s, then it begins to climb back up. But over the last 5 or 8 years, that increase that we generally see in the oldest of drivers is actually starting to flatten out. However, young drivers, those that are 16 or 17, the first time they drive, we're still seeing very high crash rates. In fact, 50% of 16-year-olds will crash in their first year.
Wow, I'd like to talk more about those numbers. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to continue the conversation with Daniel. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this.
The black truck? Hey, Christina from accounting.
Yeah, hi.
Hey, I used to date a girl named Christina.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then she dumped me for my best friend. You want to see some photos of them that I took?
I don't.
I thought we talked about this, buddy.
Buzzed and overshared again?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna call a car.
That's a smart idea.
So yeah, I know, that's why I did it.
Hey, you're gonna get back to the top of the mountain.
Does that mean I'm gonna get back with Christina?
No.
Oh.
No.
While a lot is changing in our world, at MediaCom, our focus remains the same, making sure you have the fastest, most reliable connection possible. During this critical time, we know your needs are changing. You may be working or learning from home, relying on telemedicine, or finding new ways to keep everyone entertained. If you need more speed, call or go online, and MediaCom will double your speed immediately for as low as $10 more a month for 1 year. Every second, 127 new devices connect to the internet. You can feel it happening, our digital world expanding with every breath. We're entering a whole new era of connectivity, and MediaCom will be ready to power it with one of the nation's first 10G platforms. We'll be bringing you more speed, more capacity, more security, and the power to do more than you ever dreamed possible.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and we're talking about distracted driving. As fast as cars are engineered to be safer, new distractions evolve, putting drivers in the precarious position of managing their driving behavior with a multitasking skill set that may need a lot more work than we know. We ended the last segment on a really scary number, that 50% of 16-year-old drivers have a crash in the first year of driving. Daniel, can you give us a little bit more context on these risks and how important it is to mitigate them?
Yeah, it's pretty dramatic. It's really the only time in our lives that where things are really risky. In fact, when you talk to parents, it's very important that they know that driving is the riskiest thing that we let our kids do. This is not an out of sight, out of mind thing. This is a sport that is really dangerous. Over 5,000 16 to 18-year-olds die on America's roads every year. It's a really big public health issue. I mean, car crashes by themselves are a very big public health issue. And in the last year, we're seeing in 2021 a dramatic increase in fatalities during COVID. And that is largely because there's fewer people on the roadways. People are driving faster. There's less enforcement during COVID and so forth. So it's really taken a big hit and is a major public health issue.
Now, with most of these young children, and I have to say that I have a passion for protecting children as much as possible, is there we know that distraction is an impairment, but is there a chemical impairment of any kind, alcohol? I mean, what's the largest percentage of causes of these crashes? Is it
Well, I
simply
think-
inattention, or is it a form of impairment?
Well, I think generally when we talk about impairment, we usually talk about some sort of chemical impairment, like drugs or alcohol. But there's also inattention, which is one just set of distractions, right? And what we see most generally is really inattention. And so inattention can be falling asleep, being sleepy. Inattention can be a result of drugs or alcohol. Inattention can be a result of looking at that TikTok video a few times and sending out text messages at inappropriate times while you're driving. Because there's really no such thing as multitasking. I think a lot of people think that you can do two things simultaneously, but the reality is our attention is really a spotlight. That spotlight goes between the phone to the forward roadway to the phone. And so we talk about glance frequency, how many times we look at a device, and the length of that glance. And so we see long glances and frequent glances to things like smartphones. And when you're manipulating that phone in your hand and viewing it, when your eyes are off the road and your hand is off of the wheel, that is really the worst of the worst. So texting, text input takes an enormous amount of attention.
Now let's take a look at, what about voice controls, using of your voice to interact with your phone? Is that effective? Does it work, or does it fail so often because it's a crude form of connecting to the phone that people revert to their fingers when it doesn't work?
Yeah, I think as you point out, depending on when and what you're using for voice recognition software and what kind of phone you have, it can vary greatly. The most contemporary systems are actually pretty good. But what we're finding in not only our research, but other research around the country and the world, is that people tend to look at that device while they're speaking to it. Which sort of negates any potential effect from keeping their eyes on the road. And again, that spotlight of attention, whether you're looking ahead and talking, your mind is concentrating on that speech task and not concentrating on the road ahead. So you can look ahead, but not see what is ahead while you're doing some of these fairly mentally demanding activities.
Yeah, we've had multitasking researchers on the show, and they refer to it as task switching, that humans are very good at switching tasks, but you can't ever really do two tasks at the same time with any degree of effectiveness. There are exceptions. A woman can breastfeed while doing the dishes, but they're very rare, and they're in very controlled settings. They're not in a car going 60 miles an hour down the road. When we look at this context of distraction, and you may give us a good historical overview. We know cars have gotten safer, but not everybody can afford the newest and the safest cars. But cars have gotten safer. Distractions have gone up. As a combination of these two things, have the roads gotten safer, or are they still incredibly dangerous?
Well, I think there's a number of things that roadway designers do now that are better. For instance, your viewers will see rumble strips. When you kind of drift off of the road, you'll get that really loud buzzing. Rumble strip technology wasn't around 20 years ago. So when we did get distracted or sleepy, we just simply drove off the road and didn't have any warnings. Roadways are much better quality now. The reliability of concrete and asphalt and the maintainability of roads is much better than it is 20 years ago. And so there's many different things in the roads that are much better today that help those much safer cars. And, we rotate cars about every 20 years. A car lasts about 20 years on average before it goes off. So we're really enjoying the benefits of airbags and anti-lock brakes today.
Well, these are all great points. We're going to take a short break, and afterwards we're going to ask Daniel to share some more of the numbers and stories about work at the research facility that reinforces the importance of research and education when it comes to driving today. See you all after the break. Stay tuned.
Today, more than ever, you need fast, reliable internet. At MediaCom, we want you to know you can count on us. Our fiber-powered 100% gigabit technology network was built for the future. We have enormous capacity and power, and 99.99% network reliability. So even though these are uncertain times, we're prepared. And you can be certain we'll keep your world connected.
Multiple studies have shown that marijuana can slow both driver reaction and response time, which can be really dangerous. He's here. He's here.
Wait.
What?
I can't drive.
Why? My. Oh.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. I'm Peter Komendowski, your host, and we're talking with Professor Daniel McGehee from the National Advanced Driving Simulator at the University of Iowa. You know, Daniel, there's two areas of expertise here. You're an engineer, so you know a lot about the new things happening in safety, and you also are a researcher, so you know a lot about things parents have to understand in terms of the risks of driving. On the research side with the technology, what's out there that's sort of interesting that you're seeing?
Well, most of our work right now is looking at technologies that can intervene when somebody's eyes are off of the road or they're falling asleep. It's something what's called state detection, so human state detection. So we are teaching computers to learn each individual driver's set of posture, how their eyes blink, what it looks like to look off the road, to a phone. So we're making these algorithms more intelligent. And so artificial intelligence is a really big area. Something called machine learning is very big in what we do, because we want to reduce the number of kind of nuisance alerts. We've all been in vehicles or in places where alarms are going off for no reason. We want to really reduce those and only have true alerts so that people take those seriously. So most of the work we're doing right now really factors in on how humans operate their vehicles, and then how we can intervene when things go wrong.
Now, are humans amenable to this kind of program? I know I get in my car and sometimes it says, "Welcome, Peter," so it somehow knows it's me. And other times it says, "You're not in our database." We don't know you in some form or fashion. And I look at that sort of whimsically. But you're saying there's a lot of technology behind that acknowledgement to help make my driving experience safer.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're looking at very inexpensive technologies that can measure, exactly how our head is posed when we drive. So when we fall asleep and our head begins to kind of bob down, that's really a salient feature for a computer vision system to understand how long our eyes might be closed, how our blink rates are affected when we get sleepy, and so forth. We can train a computer about each one of us doing that. And so what you're talking about, the computer has to sort of guess. It only gets one pass, whereas these systems actually have several seconds and even minutes to look at a driver and understand what might or might not be happening to them.
Now, I can't imagine, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't imagine that children are getting a huge technical debriefing on how they have to manage their behavior with this technology. They're probably just accepting it and assuming it's protecting them, and then does it create an environment where they're even distracted more because they feel like the car is going to automatically brake or stay between the lines or anything else? I mean, is this sort of do we need to give kids more knowledge and education about these systems so they don't take them for granted?
Yeah, it's a really good question. What we're seeing right now is that a lot of kids are, getting trained in vehicles that have these technologies. So by the time they get their intermediate license, they've already been sort of in the car and heard the commentary from a parent on how these systems work or don't work. Parents have an enormous amount of influence on their kids in terms of how they drive, in particular, whether they wear seatbelts, whether they drive over the speed limit. Those kinds of activities are very salient to young kids in a car. If a parent is yelling at lots of people while they're driving, their kids are likely going to be yelling at other people on the road too. So it's a very sensitive relationship that parents need to be mindful of. So if they're texting all the time while they're driving their car, their kids are going to mimic that behavior themselves and say, well, hey, mom or dad, you do that all the time, so why are you yelling at me? So parents need to be very cognizant of everything they do in their life because they are modeling that behavior.
Now, what about listening to music in the car or singing along with music? Does that somehow impair you with the driving experience?
Certainly, I can show you evidence of distraction with loud music and singing and so forth. But generally, what we can do is we talked about switching before. Music and listening to the radio is something that we're pretty good at switching off when we need to focus that spotlight of attention on something else. That kind of goes away pretty quickly. But if we're jumping up and down and singing, that can be pretty distracting. Loud music can be very distracting as well.
That's a fascinating science. We're going to take a short break, and Daniel will invite you back to share some final comments, insights, and advice, things that might help people deal with, teach their children how to drive safer. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this.
Devices connect to the internet. You can feel it happening. Our digital world expanding with every breath. We're entering a whole new era of connectivity, and MediaCom will be ready to power it with one of the nation's first 10G platforms. We'll be bringing you more speed, more capacity, more security, and the power to do more than you ever dreamed possible.
Whether it's advice on managing your anxiety or tools to help you stay grounded, Coping-19 provides a range of resources and self-care tips to help you cope with this pandemic. We can help. Find the resources that work best for you at coping-19.org.
Welcome back. Today on Surviving Bad, we're talking about distracted driving and the science behind understanding one of the most dangerous multitasking challenges we face in our everyday lives. Let's see what advice our guest has to share with us. Daniel, you're a parent, and we know that parents are the primary educator when it comes to the responsibility of driving a car. They have to give the car to the child. For the most part, they have to give them the opportunity to drive. What are the challenges you faced and maybe some of the lessons you've learned that would help other parents?
Yeah, it's a really important issue that I talk to parents about all the time, and that is practice, practice, practice. And that means in all weather. And if you're in Iowa, when it's snowing, you need to be out on the road with your son or daughter when they're 14 or 15, whenever they get their permit. When it's raining, when there's a thunderstorm, when there's black ice, the worst driving conditions, you need to be out on the road and practicing, because the last thing you want to do is have your son or daughter experience those things for the first time by themselves. And parents generally have some pretty good experience, especially if you're from Iowa. We're a snowbound state where we're used to that snow and ice on the roadways. So practice, practice, practice in all conditions. So when it's heavy, heavy rain, go and drive. If there's a tricky on-ramp or off-ramp, where if you're in Des Moines and you see the Mixmaster there, go practice that as much as you can. We have an interchange, the I-80, I-380 interchange here in Iowa City is quite tricky. That people have a lot of trouble with. I tell parents all the time, if you worry about that interchange and yourself, you need to go out there and practice with your son or daughter. So practice is everything: experience, night driving, late night driving, early morning driving, all those kinds of things. Get your son or daughter in that seat.
Now, is there some rational scientific basis for limiting how many kids you allow in the car when the child's out there alone? Because I've heard that the more kids that are in a car with the young driver, the more the risk is of a crash.
Absolutely. So graduated driving systems that are implemented in a number of states, quite a few states in the country, limit the number of passengers from either the first 6 months or first year of driving. So when I mentioned earlier, you have a 50-50 probability of having a crash that first year. You don't want to have other people distracting you. And other teen drivers are a very large distraction. They cause increased speed, more risky driving, and so forth. So as a teen, you need to just really think about how you drive, and you'll know that you drive very differently with other friends on board relative to by yourself. So parents and even teens should limit the passengers altogether in the first 6 months to a year to really just give you time to get used to the road, to your car, to other cars, to bicyclists on the side of the road, pedestrians, and so forth. Very important to just concentrate on driving.
And this is research you guys have done right here in Iowa that has changed the path of legislation in states throughout the entire country.
Yeah, so work that we've done in driver distraction and young drivers has been used around the country. Europe, not so much because they don't get their driving license till they're 18, but Iowa is one of the youngest states in the country now. There's only a few states that allow 14-year-olds to drive, and we've studied them quite a bit. And even the Iowa law doesn't allow 14-year-olds to have passengers unless they're siblings. And even siblings can be very distracting as well.
So ultimately, if you're going to give a last bit of advice to a parent handing a child a car, what should be that magic sentence they tell them before they get in the car and drive?
Well, like I said, make sure that they have lots of practice, and certainly seatbelts for everybody in the vehicle is critical. Seatbelts really, really save lives. It's very rare in the crashes that we do reconstruct and we study that we see fatalities with people who are belted. Almost always the fatalities are people with unbelted occupants or drivers.
Well, Professor Daniel McGehee, thank you so very much for sharing some really important points, and I hope our parents and the children take note of your comments. And thank you all for joining us today. Check out our website at healthyiowa.org and keep your eye on MediaCom MC22 for our next episode of Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. On MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.